In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, a line often read in meetings goes like this: "Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now." I've been thinking of this progression, what we were like, what happened, and what we are like now, in relation to the national movement for Black lives, and in evaluating systemic racism in our society as the result of an addiction to white supremacy culture. Something's happening here in Minneapolis and across our country. What we were like before and what we are like now is related to our relative privilege and social location. Black and brown people in our city and country, in our congregation and denomination, have been saying for years what it is like to be subject to micro and macro aggressions from good progressive white folks. Good progressive white folks in our city and country, in our congregation and denomination, have been saying for years, "But I'm not a racist," and "What can I do?" For many white people, like me, what we were like has been well-meaning, working for and voting for diverse political candidates, reading books on anti-racism and other oppressions, shaking our heads at our loved ones who may be the real racists in the family. And when it all gets to be too much, we may suffer from allyship fatigue. As Sharonda J. Brown of the Black Youth Project wrote in response to this notion of allyship fatigue, "I am not well. I don't have a diagnosis, but I know what this is. Trauma, depression, anxiety, fatigue, from surviving white supremacy and capitalism and fascism, all of the things they beget and the many ways they converge. These forces work together to ensure people like me will never be rested or healthy." Close quote. For many Black, Indigenous people and other people of color, there is no opportunity to step back, to take a break from the daily grind that is white supremacy culture. Our institutions are made up of us. Today, I want to spend some time about what we are doing at FUS, First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, to address systemic white supremacy culture and encourage diversity, inclusion, and equity. We'll also take a look at what our national organization, the Unitarian Universalist Association, is doing and how we can continue to live ever more fully into our values of justice and liberation. This congregation has always been one that is predominantly white, which is also true of humanism and Unitarian Universalism in general. That is not to say that there are not and have not been Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color who claim membership in these institutions today and in years far back. It is to say that whiteness is baked into our foundational bricks. FUS functions as a primarily white institution in a primarily white affluent neighborhood in a city that is only 64% white. Diversity, inclusion, and equity is a challenge. In June of 2019, then FUS board chair Holly Anderson brought forward the idea of creating a diversity, inclusion, and equity task force that would start with a couple of mandates: to ensure that board, staff, and elected committees are empowered and encouraged to look at our practices and structures as a way to work toward greater inclusion in the congregation, and to recommend resources, opportunities, readings, etc., to ensure our congregation is inclusive and focused on equity. The board approved this proposal, the team was formed, and began meeting in September of 2019. We now have 3 board members, Amanda Harrington, Denise Victoria de Morelos, and Richard Sire. 3 other congregation members, Sue Blackwell, Perry Nixon, and Mindy Rieger, and 2 ministers, Rev. Jim and myself, in our group, which we call Moving Toward Equity, the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Team at FUS. Our work to date has included creating a rubric for various congregational groups to use when populating their membership, a set of questions to evaluate the needs of the group and what new members might bring to the group. We also are curating a resource list, which we will unveil today. You should see the link soon in the chat. This resource list is a work in progress with some of our recommendations for movies, books, online articles, websites, etc., to further our knowledge of systemic racism, other oppressions, and the effects of white supremacy culture, and also perhaps where we may best put our efforts for change. 5 of our 8 team members got together this week to create a short video to talk about our work. Here is Moving Toward Equity. It has been a great joy to work with Moving Toward Equity, the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity team at First Unitarian Society. We have a few questions for some members of our team as a way for you to meet them. And I'll start with Sue Blackwell, one of our co-chairs of the team. And Sue, my question for you is, how do you hope that our congregation's engagement in this work will make a difference both inside FUS and beyond our walls in the wider world?
Well, I'm excited to do this work because it really needs to be done. The inequities generated by our educational and social and political systems and economic systems have been with us for a long time. And as a white woman, I have had an advantage in a lot of those systems. I am hoping that because there seems to be a new willingness to examine ourselves and change our behavior and be accountable for our behavior, that we will be able to change as a congregation, as individuals, and affect change in our community and the world.
Thank you, Sue. Next, I'll ask Richard Sire this question. Richard, why is doing the work of diversity, inclusion, and equity at FUS important to you?
In addition to environmental protection, I think these principles and the large issues surrounding them are really the issues in the United States for this year, this decade, this century. And I think we need to be continually examining and suppressing kind of that human impulse towards greed. And I think we need to really focus to assure that people's basic needs, their rights, and their dignity is what's prioritized. And FUS has been an important part of my community for 20 years, and I think it is a great setting in which to do the reflecting, the self-examination, the change, and the advocacy work that we can be a part of.
Wonderful. Thank you, Richard. Amanda Harrington shares the co-chair duties with Sue Blackwell. Thank you for that leadership. And the question I'll ask you is the same one I asked Sue. How do you hope that FUS's engagement in this work will make a difference both within our congregation and beyond our walls?
My hope is that FUS members can move beyond just saying that we believe in justice and equity and the inherent worth and dignity of all people and acceptance. I have not always felt welcomed at FUS for a variety of reasons, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way. So my hope is really that by engaging in this work with us, FUS members can take actions and change their behaviors that help all people to feel welcome and included at FUS and ideally in the broader community.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And Mindy Rieger, this question for you: what inspires you to do this work?
Well, I feel inspired to do work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion based on my own experience as a disabled woman, but also in my professional life. I spend a lot of time connecting with families and kids at a public library setting, and this has really shown me that there's a lot that needs to change in the systems that we have in place.
Thank you. Thanks, Mindy. There are 3 members of our team who were not able to join us for our recording tonight, and those are Perry Nixon, Denise Victoria de Morales, and Reverend Jim Fody. And we are so grateful for their participation in moving toward equity. Look for more from this team. We're hoping that you'll hear a lot about what we're doing, and we invite you to be a part of our work as well. Thank you. Special thanks to Justice Bovee for putting together this piece. It will take local and national focus to change our culture. Unitarian Universalism has no mother church, no hierarchy that tells us what we must do. Rather, we are an association of congregations that covenant together to honor our 7 principles, organize together for justice and liberation, and share theological practice and debate. There are 2 things on the national scene that I want to bring to your attention. One is the 8th Principle Project, a movement to add the language of beloved community, accountability, anti-racism, and other oppressions into our principles. Congregations across the US and Canada are adopting the 8th Principle, and over the next 3 General Assemblies, our association will vote on moving forward with the revised principles. Our Moving Toward Equity team is in the early stages of bringing this work to FUS. We are excited to learn what has worked and what has not worked in other congregations, and we know that signing on to affirm the 8th Principle is just the beginning of the work to make it live in our congregation. The other exciting work at the national level is the publication of the Commission on Institutional Change's report, Widening the Circle of Concern. A 3-year process of inquiry and deep analysis led to this critical statement. The report says this: the world around us is different than it was a decade ago or even 5 years ago. The question is, how will our living tradition keep up with the times? What choices will we make or fail to make? And how will that affect the relevancy and survival of our faith? And this is the question, I think, for all of us. What choices will I make or fail to make? And how will those choices affect the relevancy and survival of my integrity, of the integrity of our beloved FUS, of our nation? Reverend David said a few weeks back that the right question to ask is not, am I safe, but are we ready? Because what we were like is no longer enough, because something has happened from which we cannot turn back, and because what we are like now must be ready. The supremacy of whiteness is sewn into the very fabric of this nation. So the task before all of us is mighty. We will need every one of us to find our lane, to learn and listen, to get ready for the cultural shift that is long, long overdue in this country. May we never turn back from our promise to love all of humanity. Never turn back to mere comfort when liberation is ahead.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.